Welcome everyone. I am very pleased to have together with us for this new Privacy Espresso attorney Stephen Mathias from Kochhar&Co, leading law firm in India, and he is definitely one of the leading experts on privacy in India. The recent data privacy law of India is coming to the fore. So we would like to hear from you, Stephen. When is it coming to enter into force, and whether there will be any adaptation period or gestation period for data controllers in particular?
Sure. Great to talk to you again, Andrea. So the law was passed last week by both houses of parliament, and it received the assent of the president immediately. So now the law is finalized. It's not in force because to come into force, the government has to notify when it comes into force. The government has stated that it would take between 6 to 10 months to operationalize the law. So I think 10 months is the period probably when the substantive portions of the law will come in. India doesn't have a history really of gestation period, but we do have a history where the government will notify different parts of the law coming to force at different times. So, for example, the provisions on the Data Protection Board of India, which is the new DPA, those provisions may come to force earlier, so they can then go about appointing the DPA, and then they need to prepare notifications and so on. So the indications are at the moment it will come into force in 10 months. I do hope the government will be forward-thinking and will notify right away when it will come to force, so everyone has a deadline that they can work towards.
Excellent, Stephen. This law had a long gestation period anyway, and you have already published a lot in regards to the various drafts of the law, all articles extremely interesting. So we strongly advise the viewers of these Privacy Espresso or listeners of the podcast to get hold of them. And we have published much material that you have published on our platforms. Now, this new draft, can you tell us which are the main elements of it? And in particular, could you highlight us and our viewers on the differences or similarities with the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union?
Sure. So, it's been 5 years in the making and 5 drafts. The first 3 drafts were more comprehensive drafts, which were kind of based on GDPR. The fourth one, which was released in late 2022, was a much simpler draft because they realized last year that India might, the Indian industry might struggle to comply with a GDPR type law. And this one, the finalized one, is based on that last one. And so it's a fairly simple draft, much simpler than GDPR. And it has less requirements than GDPR. So, for example, there are rights of data fiduciaries, which is the same thing as data subjects, relating to access and correction, updation, deletion, and so on. But other rights like, privacy by design, data portability, right not to have decisions taken entirely on an automated basis, all of that is missing from this law. In terms of grounds for processing, which I think is the most important thing, what everyone wants to know, the main ground is really consent. There is no general legitimate interest type of ground that you see in GDPR. There are exemptions which are called legitimate use, and it covers the typical things like compliance with law, compliance with judicial orders, medical emergencies, law and order, and things like that. So when it comes to consent, the language on consent, that it must be free consent, unambiguous, and so on, that's all almost pretty much exactly the same as in GDPR. So the question then arises whether India will import the jurisprudence that the EU has built up on what consent means, because the language is almost the same. And if it does so, then that's a very strict standard to follow, with no way out other than consent.
That is very interesting. And let's talk about the impact of this new legislation on foreign companies. Kochhar yourself, as one of his leading experts, are serving a lot of foreign companies. So in general terms, what do you expect about the impact on foreign companies? And in particular, maybe two follow-up questions. The first one, is this law going to impact the massive outsources industry of India? And the second question would be, what do you expect for what concerns foreign companies in terms of data localization? Is there a specific requirement in the law in these regards?
Sure. So I divide this into three situations. One is Indian companies processing personal data of Indians. I think there it's very clear the law applies. The second is foreign companies processing personal data of Indians, meaning they are outside India. They don't have a presence in India. And the third would be Indian businesses, Indian entities, whether foreign owned or not, processing foreign data. So when it comes to the second one, foreign companies processing personal data of Indians, what the law says is that it would apply where they offer goods and services to persons in India. So I think the real question is, what does offer mean here? If you're, say, an online business outside India, and you're open for business to anyone in the world, and someone in India, subscribes to services, are you offering, services kind of specifically to persons in India? So I think that's the question there, and it's not entirely clear what the answer is. When it comes to Indian businesses processing foreign data, there actually is an exemption in the law. It applies to most things, not everything. The main one that's kind of not exempt is the requirement to maintain reasonable security standards to safeguard personal data. So that would still apply. But otherwise, if you're collecting personal data, say in the EU, and say you've used legitimate interest as your ground for processing that data, and then you send it to India to be processed. So then the worry would be, would Indian law require consent? The answer would be no, because Indian law would not, most of Indian law would not apply in that situation.
Excellent, very clear, certainly very useful. So we have between 2 and 10 months for the full entry into force of the law. Pending this period, could you list for our viewers some top advice tips for data processors and data controllers?
Sure. So, during this 5-year process, as we've had multiple drafts, clients have come to me asking, we want some advice, we want to move forward, and so on. And I've held them back and I've said, this is just a draft. It's not been presented to Parliament. We don't know what the final draft will be. Don't spend time and effort on this just yet. So I think that's changed now, because this is a final draft. It's been passed by Parliament. It's been assented to by the President. So the only thing left now is, when will it come into force? So I think that process of firstly understanding the law can begin with all businesses that process personal data in India. And then the issue is, what personal data do we want to collect? How do we, what purposes are we processing them for? Then the issue would be, is there a ground under the law which doesn't require consent? If consent is required, then, one has to prepare detailed notices with, granular information, all of that. And then I think there's the second part to all of this. The first part is more about, policy, privacy policy, and so on. The second part, I think, is really about the technology you use in order to, manage that personal data. Because I think, Indian industry has not really been mindful of the fact that, personal data, collection of personal data comes with obligations, comes with rights of the data subjects. But now you'll have a data subject who might write in and say, what personal data do you have of mine? I want to update it, delete it, and so on. And there's also a requirement that the data fiduciary or data controller has to delete personal data on its own when it's no longer required. So I think they have to build processes to deal with that.
Thank you very much, Stephen. As I said since the very beginning, you are one of the leading experts. So we strongly recommend all the viewers to come to you for further advice. And the recommendation is always the same, not to waste the last minute. We say that there is some time to comply. It doesn't mean that everyone should wait until that moment. The process for compliance should start right now. Consult Stephen, other technology experts in these regards, in order to be sure that when the law enters into force, everything will be pretty much on route for having required policies, because privacy compliance, above all, is a competitive advantage. Infuses trust in the customers, in the clients, in investors, in the business community. So once more, Stephen, thank you very much. We are sure that the viewers will find it very interesting and hopefully come to you for your counseling. And we will certainly publish additional information from your side and from Kochhar on this important piece of legislation and others concerning India. Thank you very much to you and to everyone who was following this podcast and video.
Good chatting with you, Andrea.